Welcome to your Daily 5 for Thursday, February 29th, 2024. Friend of the show, Michael Fisher, does a series of videos on his YouTube channel, which of course I'm going to link to, that are nostalgic revisits of older cell phones. And for some people, and this is not supposed to be a derogatory statement, but there are probably people listening who are too young to remember that it wasn't always just Android and iOS and variations of that. That at one point, mostly pre-iPhone, definitely pre-iPhone now that I say that, there were really no agreed upon rules about what cell phones were outside of they had to be mobile devices that could get and make calls. But outside of that, there was a ton of experimentation. They were all different form factors. There were just numerous OSs and approaches, and don't get me wrong, kind of getting a standard or some standards in place is of course an ideal thing so people know what they're using, but we really have gotten dialed down to really just two approaches to how to do cell phones. And there was a point where there was a wild amount of variation in what you could get and what you could use. And one of my my favorite phone of that time period, by far, without even thinking about it, was a device called the Palm Pre. And it just so happens that the latest entry in Michael's When Phones Were Fun series, which is fantastic, is all about the Palm Pre. And it's a pretty long one by the standards of most of these episodes because, like me, Michael is a big fan of this phone and misses it. It was not a perfect phone. I'll refer you to Michael's video. He covers everything about it, but there are genuinely two things about the Palm Pre. One, which isn't specific to the Palm Pre, but more of the cell phones of that era. But there is one thing from that time, and that phone in particular, that I still dearly miss. And people say, oh, headphone jack, I wish that was still around, a removable SD card slot. And I certainly understand that. Those are the priorities for those people. I'm more hung up on the physical SIMs going away, but that's a separate 5 entirely. But the thing that I really do wish some modern flagship phone, of course it would have to be Android, iOS would never even touch this, but one thing I do miss is a slide-out physical keyboard, which used to be far more common, and of course now is gone because everything has gone to pure touchscreens. And I'll admit, this is at least partially, if not entirely due to my age, I have never developed the muscle memory to use a touchscreen keyboard in any reliable way. Whenever I type something on even looking at a touchscreen keyboard when I type on it, it is a mess. I mean, autocorrect tries as much as it can, but even it can't handle my inability to type on a touchscreen. Whereas I can remember physically in my hands, I can feel the Palm Pre keyboard. Now, Michael wasn't as big on the Palm Pre keyboard as I am, probably because he's used far more phones with far more keyboards, and I'm sure he's right that there are better examples out there. But for me, in my use, from my memory, nothing beat it. I mean, I can feel that keyboard, and I loved using it. And I actually got to a point, I remember, where I could type a lot of things, not everything. I'm not going to pretend I was that good, but I could type a lot on that keyboard without having to look at it, with minor corrections. It was also a wonderful device to hold, as Michael points out in his video. It had this wonderful ergonomics to it. It was just so well designed. Now, I'm not going to tell you that it was flawless. It had its problems, but I really wish that there was still some version of that phone available today, running the WebOS, obviously an evolved version, which technically is running on a lot of LG electronics like the TVs. They are running WebOS, but I mean, it's not like using a cell phone with it. It's basically the framework of that with a completely different use case. But I genuinely do miss that phone. There's lots of things about phones like headphone jacks, that type of thing, where I'm like, okay, yeah, those would be nice, but I don't really miss them because I didn't really use them all that much. But that slide-out keyboard and a removable battery, which used to be common on lots of cell phones. So that's not specific to the Pre, but just the ability to swap out a battery so that if you had a swollen battery or a malfunctioning battery, you didn't have to lose the whole phone. You could just pop the thing out and put another one in there. That's something we've just lost, along with that physical keyboard. So yeah, I watched that video and I have to admit, that's one of the few times I really thought about the fact that, yeah, if somebody revived that and made it, just functional enough, I would probably use it even if I had to accept some compromises on it, because that thing was, I wouldn't want it that size. I'd want it full size, but I imagine a physical slide-out keyboard with a removable battery behind where the slider goes, and I can so easily imagine using that. I really can. So, yeah, number one, that When Phones Were Fun series that Michael does, it's fantastic. It really does show you, especially if you're on the younger side and don't remember all this stuff, some really wild approaches to cell phones before, again, we kind of standardized. And there's a good side to that, but there are things we lost too. But yeah, out of all those, watching the Palm Pre one, that just made me think, yeah, I'd use that today. Later.